Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 336. The Identities we weave. The last few episodes have led me to a rather uncomfortable conclusion. It's a bit brutal on first hearing, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, so please stay with me. Ready? Very few of us are who we set out to be, wanted to be, or hoped we might be. And that's if we had any intentions in the first place. You might have heard me talk about that when you listened to the episode about how drive without direction becomes drift. I remember so clearly that I wanted to be an air hostess, in old language, cabin crew as they are known today, but I was too short. Then I wanted to be in the merchant navy, always the tomboy and part of my rebellious era, I recall. And finally, I wanted to be a young mother so that when my child or children were grown up, I would still be young enough to be living life to the fullest. Although it was only a few years later when I decided that 40 was definitely past it and no one would be enjoying life at that age. Oh, the innocence or ignorance of youth. None of my aspirations came to pass, but each of my youthful desires seemed to add another label to my identity. I was already known as the quiet one, yet branded flippant and facetious at 14 by Miss Bailey, my form teacher. I was labelled as headstrong at 17 when I left school and landed myself a good job during the Easter holidays. And in my 30s, I was also called dull as ditchwater, which is the polite version in case there are tender ears listening. Now into the mix, I could add too short, stupidly rebellious, as opposed to sensibly rebellious, which sounds like an oxymoron if ever I heard one, and a poor judge of character when I married a wholly unsuitable boy at 19. In fact, this was just an extension of my rebellious phase, but I was told on so many occasions that I was throwing my life away and wasting my potential in the process. Some of these things were said to my face, some implied during conversations, and some I heard about from third parties. What is true of all of them is that they were judgments, and many of them stuck worse than chewing gum to the sole of my shoe. You see, in my formative years, which in my case lasted well into my 50s, I know, I didn't know how to let go of someone's opinion of me. My please others driver ensured that I tried to be liked by everyone, approved of by everyone, and, am I really going to say this? Okay, I am, desired by everyone. Now, having said that, I feel more than a little sick, and I can feel the start of a vulnerability hangover looming, but I've always said I'll be honest with you in this space. As you might imagine, trying to be all things to all people confused the hell out of my real persona, but the labels didn't stop there. When I stepped into an engineering role at a time when women didn't commonly hold those kinds of jobs, I was labelled as deluded. When I applied for a promotion just before I met the criteria, and I'm talking 2 weeks before I met the criteria, I was called a cheat and brazen. Then, when I took voluntary redundancy rather than holding on to my secure, well-paid, outwardly respectable job that was actually asking me to compromise my values, I was labelled as foolish. I mean, who deliberately walks away from an apparently good job? Me, that's who, and I'd do it again tomorrow if I had my time over again. Now that's quite a collection of labels, and no matter how hard I tried to sew them into the back of my jumper or pullover, there was never enough room. So some were attached to my sleeve for all to see. And that's where some of my problems started. You see, the labels I'd been given might have been partly true and even relevant in their time, but they did not define me then, and they certainly shouldn't define me for a lifetime. That they have is mainly down to me and the fact I wore them on my sleeve. And it hurts me to say that, dear listener, but I'll never pull the wool over your eyes regarding my own journey. I also recognise that I'm not alone in struggling with this. Dr. Tara Brach helped me to make sense of this when she described how the stories we build around our experiences, particularly the painful ones, can become the lens through which we see ourselves. Looking back, I realised that's exactly what I'd done, because it wasn't just the label that I'd sewn in. It was the deeper meaning that I'd somehow woven into the fabric of my identity. And it's this very point that became the catalyst for this month's edition of the Flourishing Nudge, my LinkedIn newsletter. In it, I explored why I had clung on to outdated versions of myself, which revealed a few of the reasons or excuses I'd been using. Which begs the question here, what labels have you gathered throughout your life and career? More to the point, what meaning have you allowed to become part of the fabric of your being? Then, which ones, if any, accurately reflect your reality? And which is it time to unstitch from your pullover? My favourite unstitcher, not sure that's even a word, but it is now, is called a ripper stitch, and I have several around the house as a result of my dressmaking and sewing hobby. Let me tell you why I love them so much, though. A bit like removing an elastoplast from a wound, careful is not the way to go for me when the end is nigh. If it's time to come off, or unpick, or unravel, the quicker the better in my book. The ripper stitch makes a very satisfying noise too as it rips through the stitches at breakneck speed. None of this little by little nonsense. Takes too long, and the sound effects don't bring me nearly so much glee. So it is with outdated labels or identities. Don't dither, procrastinate, or ease them out gently. I found that slowly opens the door to overthinking and changing my mind. If they are time expired, get rid and feel free to add your own sound effects as you do. Getting rid then paves the way for the next iteration of you. And as we are continual works in progress, there will always be a new iteration. Well, that is for as long as you choose there to be. And my favourite people to work with are those who are not resigned to live forever in a cage of their own making. And what fascinates me is to observe people's reactions and to support them as they realise which bars of their cages they picked up and put in place freely and which were handed to them by someone else. That doesn't make the other person, the bar hander for want of a better term, wrong, by the way, but it does remind us to be alert to those trying to hand us more bars when they notice that we have some freedom. Freedom for some is a scary concept, as there is no cage to blame for their way of being in the world. Yeah, I know, but it had to be said. Freedom for me is full of possibilities, infinite possibilities, if you listen to the previous episode, which means that they stand more chance of becoming reality. And that, dear listener, excites me. We spend so much of our lives picking up and carrying labels we've gathered along the way, but rarely do we stop to ask whether they and their associated meaning still deserve a place in our lives. Some probably do. Others will have undoubtedly outlived their usefulness years ago, yet we're still wearing them as though they tell the truth about who we are. So my invitation to you is simply this. Check your labels. Keep the ones that serve you, but don't hesitate to put a ripper stitch to good use on those that have reached their expiry date. And if there's something here that resonates, which you know warrants a little more explanation, you'll find the article on my website a useful place to start. It comes from a different angle and unpacks why we tend to ignore the evidence that we've changed. It's like part of our subconscious is a judge saying persuasively, "Will the jury please disregard that last statement?" Rather than disregarding, it's time to pay attention to the evidence. Because flourishing isn't about becoming someone else entirely. It's about creating space for the next iteration of you rather than continuing to live inside a version you've outgrown. And if you're wondering what the next iteration might look like, watch this space as I have something coming up that will help with precisely that. Just remember, I'm not handing you the bars for your cage. I'm showing you where the open door is. What you choose is up to you. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.